Saturday morning was come, and all the summer world was bright and fresh and brimming with life. There was a song in every heart, and if the heart was young, the music issued at the lips. Well, perhaps music wasn't issuing from every pair of lips. The only sound coming from Tom Sawyer's lips was a sigh as his Aunt Polly's threat echoed in his ears. Now, Tom is sighing because he has on his mind a fence, a very big fence. Before Tom Sawyer can even entertain thoughts of spending this Saturday with his friends at the swimming hole, this fence has got to be whitewashed, all 800 square feet of it. From Tom Sawyer, the Glorious Whitewasher. It's a classic piece of Americana. Yet for today's professionals, for whom striking deals is part and parcel of their job, and we're talking specifically about purchasing agents, this episode illustrates a particularly important lesson. This program is an introduction to a series of programs on the art of negotiation, designed specifically to give purchasing agents the skills necessary to be successful in deliberations with vendors. We'll discuss the hows and the whys, the fundamentals of negotiation. And to help us do that, we're going to call on this classic episode from the Adventures of Tom Sawyer. Because, as you'll see, Tom Sawyer gets that fence whitewashed using the fundamentals necessary to plan any negotiations. Just take a few minutes to watch what he does, and then we'll talk about how he does it, and how what he does can help you. Under threat of Aunt Polly's wrath, Tom initially attacks the job with all the vim and vigor a young boy could muster. But Tom's energy didn't last. He began to think of the fun he had planned for this day, and his sorrows multiplied. Soon his friends would come tripping along, and they'd make fun of him for having to work. And he didn't have anywhere near the kind of money he'd need to pay them to help him. But at this dark and hopeless moment, an inspiration hit upon him.
Hi, Tom. See, you gotta work, huh? Oh, hi, Ben. Work? This is not work. Not work? You mean you like it? Of course I like it. And how many times you get to whitewash a whole fence? And all by yourself? Yeah, I guess you're right. Say, Tom, how about letting me whitewash a little? Gee, if it was up to me, Ben, I might. But you know my Aunt Polly. She's awful particular. And this fence has got to be done just right. Please, Tom. I ain't never done a special job like this before. I'll give you my apple core. Well, maybe. But I'd have to have the whole apple.
The whitewashing episode is sometimes cited as an example of a boy trying to get out of work. Well, perhaps on one level it is. But on another level, the level that interests us, this episode shows negotiation techniques used to reach an agreement between two parties. An agreement that gets the job done to the satisfaction of both parties. The term negotiation can be defined in a number of ways. A dictionary says, negotiation is a conference or discussion designed to produce an agreement. A professional association says, negotiation is the art of achieving mutual advantages without arousing hostilities. Whatever definition you use, you'll probably agree that negotiation is an art, a science, and a skill. as we saw with Tom Sawyer and his whitewashing. But defining negotiation is relatively simple compared with attaining the skill. Other programs in this series will discuss specific techniques for attaining these skills. But for the moment, we're going to discuss why purchasing agents need to negotiate. They continually face the determination of whether a price is right or whether there may be room for negotiation. No two suppliers are likely to produce an item under identical conditions, and in the final analysis, as when Tom Sawyer accepts virtually anything for payment, from marbles to a broken knife. Prices are set by people, not by methods. So why negotiate? Because there are financial benefits. Even if you're not negotiating directly over price, you can still save money. In some situations, price may not be negotiable, but other cost elements may be, including packaging, maintenance, and service, technical assistance, or terms of payment. And there are informational benefits. Negotiation ensures a better mutual understanding between buyer and seller regarding the product or service itself. Negotiation includes clarification and agreement about technical requirements, delivery schedules, shipping instructions, credit arrangements, and quality provisions. And then there's the question of when to negotiate and what items are negotiable. Now consider entering into negotiations anytime you're not satisfied with the product's specs or transaction terms. For example, you should negotiate when product specifications are tight or complex. Your deliberations will help ensure that the vendor has a good understanding of your requirements and may contribute towards your obtaining a better product or services for the money. You should negotiate when the procurement is the first of its kind. Again, deliberation will help you find out from a vendor whether or not it can satisfy your requirements or if he has something better to offer. And you should negotiate when there's not time to solicit competitive bidding on the item. What to negotiate? Well, in a word, you should negotiate everything. Deliberation should be held over terms of all pending contracts, short and long-term contracts, blanket orders, as well as service contracts. You should negotiate on specialized equipment purchased and large-scale yearly contracts, for example, on office supplies or MRO supplies. Even on fixed price situations, you should negotiate. Maybe the price itself can't be adjusted because of manufacturers' agreements, trade customs, or collusion, and that can be a real negotiating nightmare. Yet, negotiations can be used even in such a situation. Suppliers, hungry for business, often can be persuaded to make concessions that may not affect the quoted price, but which definitely do lower your ultimate cost. So in a nutshell, those are some of the whys and wherefores of negotiation, which brings us to the hows. Again, subsequent programs will discuss that process in detail. But let us whet your appetite by calling back our friend Tom Sawyer to help us illustrate three fundamentals of negotiation, 3 points all negotiations have in common, whether it's getting a fence whitewashed or committing your company to a multi-million-dollar piece of equipment. There are 3 basic elements for planning any negotiations. The first is collecting the necessary information and background data to support your negotiating position. The second is determining the size and composition of your negotiating team. And the third is establishing your own objectives and attempting to assess the supplier's objectives. Now, as I told you in the beginning, the episode of whitewashing the fence is an illustration of those 3 fundamentals, and now we're going to see how. The first fundamental is gathering data. Tom knows that the job of whitewashing the fence is important to his Aunt Polly. She wants it done and done correctly. And everyone in the neighborhood, Tom's friends included, knows that Aunt Polly is a stern taskmaster. Tom also knows that the whitewashing would be easier all around if a number of people could share the job. It's work anyone, even a kid, could do because it requires no special skills. But special skills or not, Tom is not in a position of being able to pay anyone for their help. But he has gathered all the appropriate data, such as it is. Now, in the case of the purchasing agent, gathering data will be more complex and time-consuming, but the principle's the same. You need to line up economic, engineering, accounting, legal, and financial facts that will serve as a backdrop for negotiations. And that brings us to the second fundamental, gathering a negotiating team. Now, the fact of the matter is that Tom doesn't have a negotiating team per se, but he's like the members of a team rolled into one. Just what you'd expect to find in a purchasing agent for a small company who has to know a little bit about a lot of areas. Tom does know what needs to be done. He knows he can count on the reputation of his Aunt Polly. He knows he has a limited budget, and he knows people and what it takes to get their interest. So Tom has self-contained some financial, some production, and some marketing expertise. Now, obviously, in a larger company, there may be a real team with a number of people taking part in the actual negotiations besides the purchasing agent. As you get information on costs and specifications from manufacturing and engineering, for example, you may feel that having representatives from those departments in the negotiating sessions would strengthen your hand. Or if complex legal problems on the supplier's patents or proprietary rights, for example, seem sure to come up, it may be wise to have company counsel on hand. Now, if the points to be negotiated have some relation to the reliability or saleability of your company's end product, you might want to have a marketing representative present, and so on. Now, obviously, you don't want to walk into a negotiation with a small army behind you, so the makeup of the negotiating team will depend on what you consider the most critical aspects to be negotiated. And of course, different team members can be brought in at different phases of the negotiation as required. And that brings us to the third fundamental, establishing your objectives and attempting to assess those of your suppliers. Tom's primary objective is to get the fence whitewashed, preferably with assistance, so he won't have to tackle it alone. So once the inspiration hits, Tom puts a plan in place that helps him get that assistance. He makes the whitewashing itself seem less like work and more like a golden opportunity. He feigns reluctance to share the responsibility, which his friends understand from his Aunt Polly's reputation. He also knows his friends will pay a fair price for the privilege of helping if they believe the deal is fair. So what then results is a series of negotiations. Tom doesn't jump at their initial offers because, as any good purchasing agent knows, negotiation begins where the quoted price leaves off. In the real world of business, the application of the three fundamentals can and does occur simultaneously. Because there's a logical tie-in while you're compiling and analyzing data, you're actually beginning the process of establishing your objectives. And at the same time, you try to estimate what the supplier's goals will be. Now, the cost and market information you bring together provides the framework for your objectives. And there are a couple of other points worth noting, points about the use of time and the establishing of a basic position. Tom Sawyer had one day to meet his objectives. In business, having a whole day can be a luxury, and that's why planning around the three fundamentals is important. If the product you're buying is needed yesterday, as so often happens, unfortunately, the supplier may have you up against the wall. And that's why you need to have departments who give you realistic lead times. When they don't, they weaken one of your most effective negotiating tools, time. Now, on the other hand, if your cost and price analyses are sound and you suspect from your research that the supplier is weak or uncertain about his, You'll probably go into the negotiations the stronger party. You'll at least have a psychological advantage. Now, the other point is to establish a basic position for yourself and or within your negotiating team from which to negotiate. Give yourself a range to work within. Now, for a certain piece of equipment, for example, you may have set a price of $45,000 as your tentative objective. But based on your research, you may be able to negotiate the price down to $40,000. Now, on the other hand, based on some weaknesses in your position, you may be prepared to settle for a price of $50,000. Now, these positions, your basic objective, your most optimistic minimum, and your maximum should be considered before you even meet the vendor. At the same time, you should be estimating what figures your vendor will bring to the negotiating table. Now, based on your cost analyses and your knowledge of the vendor's bargaining strength, you can come fairly close to the limits the other side has set. Now, here the vendor will take a stand, if forced to, at about $42,000. Now, that's his minimum, but he'd really like to get $52,000. Well, however, given the nature of negotiations and his estimates of the company's strengths, he probably would be prepared to accept $47,000 as a reasonable offer. So, looking at the objective of both sides, we have a range of negotiation wherein an agreement can be reached. And that, as we said earlier, is one definition of negotiation: a conference or discussion designed to produce an agreement. Negotiation is a difficult but essential art. It's at the very heart of purchasing and the competitive system. There are financial benefits and informational benefits to be obtained if you follow the three fundamentals for planning negotiations. Then your negotiations will truly be the art of achieving mutual advantages without arousing hostilities.